boils and ghouls. Turn out the lights and keep the popcorn coming, because it's time for another episode of Fright Fights Podcast. Fright Fights Podcast. Get ready for your gore gang. Tyler Cavan, Chris Lax, and Mike McKinney tackling horror news, reviews, and fight for their survival. Coming to you from the Fright Fights Fear Lodge. Get ready to sink your fangs into a battle that will make your blood run cold. This is Fright Fights.
What's going on, guys? In this special episode of Fright Fights, we wanted to take you back to the video shelves, but not necessarily video. We're talking about Blu-ray. And Blu-ray is a media form that we absolutely are well acquainted with as collectors, especially 4Ks now. But, me and Chris has a problem, and it's getting a little bit less of a problem in the future, knowing that there's a lot of things that continue to come out every single day. But there are movies out there that we really want on Blu-ray that's not, right, Chris?
I want every movie on Blu-ray. I don't care how crappy the movie is. If I own it in my collection, I want it on Blu-ray. That's just the weird collector in me. But there's been a lot of movies over the years that have somehow fell through the crack of media and is either not available on either DVD or Blu-ray, or made it to DVD but just never made it to Blu-ray yet. So me and Tyler wanted to take just a few moments here and just pinpoint out a few of those titles that we wished was made to the next format. As we are deeming this, why aren't you on Blu-ray? And the one of the choices I have, I'm just going to list off three of them. But one of the choices I have is a movie called Rumpelstiltskin. It is a 90s horror film, and it's a really cheesy, low budget like monster movie. It's the horror take of the fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin. I really do enjoy this movie. It was made by the same guy who did Leprechaun, so if that puts it in the kind of tone of what the film is. But it did make it to DVD. I own the DVD. It was a very limited DVD release. It's kind of actually hard to find. I don't think it was released into like retail stores. I think you could only get it like either at a video store at the time or online. But I think that the movie itself it's done by Lionsgate, or it's owned by Lionsgate now. So if it was going to be released, they could do, the Vestron video series. They could put that in there. And I would love to see that movie because nostalgically, it's one of my favorite horror films of all time. It is so much fun for me. A lot of stuff I remember about it, and just wish I had that ultimate version of it on Blu-ray. What is one of yours, Tyler?
Well, yeah, that movie is like $90 on DVD now too, so you have to be very lucky to find it.
Yeah,
it's crazy. But and it's not available on any streaming services either, which makes it even harder. So that's definitely one that really does need to be on Blu-ray. Linnea Quigley's Horror Workout, Chris. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, that's another one. It's like $500 normally, but it's coming to Blu-ray finally.
Yeah, it's finally coming to Blu-ray,
which is insane. But one that's been way long overdue, just like Rumpelstiltskin, not quite as out of print though, is The Hitcher. And this was the original one, not the remake, right?
Yeah, so it's an HBO title. I think that's what the holdup is, right?
It is an HBO title. I don't know too much about why it hasn't been, because I know there's been a lot of people that has tried to get their hands on it. I know Vinegar Syndrome was talking about it. Somebody asked Vinegar Syndrome if they were like, is there any chance of The Hitcher? And I remember, this has been maybe a year and a half ago though, but Vinegar Syndrome said something on the lines of, that's not with us. Somebody else has those rights. So I don't know if they're alluding to the fact they cannot get the rights, or if they're alluding to the fact that another company has the rights that's holding it up. but it feels very Second Sight. Like I feel like Second Sight might be doing something with it secretively. I think there was some talk about that, but the DVD fucking sucks. Like I mean it's boxed, it's pan and scan. It's not a very good transfer whatsoever, and it was at one point streaming on HBO Max, and that transfer is just as bad too. So it criminally needs to be, restored and put on Blu-ray. I mean, at this point, probably 4K, I'm sure. But again, you can I think get the DVD for like $20, so it's not super out of print or anything, but it's definitely one that needs the Blu-ray treatment for sure.
Yeah, and it's streaming on HBO Max, or at least it was at one point. I don't know if it still is. So
Sucks,
I
dude.
know Warner Brothers has something to do with it. Either they know who has it, or they are the ones who officially have it because they own HBO.
Mhm.
I just don't know if there's any like licensing issues or anything, or music. I don't know what the deal is, why they haven't put any time or effort into trying to figure that out. But yeah, that would look really good on Blu-ray.
Oh yeah.
Another one that I would love to see. It has to do with the franchise as well. It's not necessarily deemed like the greatest movie of all time, but it is part of the franchise. But that's The Stepfather 3.
Yeah.
This is one of those movies that it also has not made it to DVD as well. It's not doesn't have a DVD release, it doesn't have a Blu-ray release. I'm not even sure who owns the rights to it. I think Lionsgate does. Again, this might be something that the Vestron series could pick up if they still own the rights to it. I think that the Lionsgate was the company that released the VHS, or Artisan or something like that, that Lionsgate bought at one point or something, owned it. But it's not like the greatest movie. It does take place on Easter, so it is like a holiday horror film, but it is part of a really good franchise. Stepfather 1 and 2 are great. Both of those are on Blu-ray. So it's just a shame that the third entry in the film is just missing, and we don't have it on the newer formats on digital formatting. And I think it's streaming places. I think you can stream it stuff, but you just can't get a
Ooh.
physical copy.
And the thing is like it could be something that it sounds like something Vestron would put out. Like it does sound like that, and Vestron doesn't really necessarily do a lot of stuff anymore. Like they're kind of slowing down on their titles, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, yeah, it's a shame.
It is, yeah, because they do put out some really good stuff, and I mean, without them coming, we wouldn't have a lot of the titles that we've got on Blu-ray. And I mean, a lot of the titles I was wanting on Blu-ray, I mean, it's been released on Vestron. But I think we should move focus and talk a little bit about films that really need a better Blu-ray treatment because while there are a lot of films out there that are on Blu-ray. You have to have a region-free player. Maybe the restoration wasn't exactly perfect. It's very hard to find that region-free copy. And whenever I say that, I'm talking about De La Morte de la Mort. That is Cemetery Man.
Cemetery Man.
And that is something that technically kind of is on Blu-ray. It's an import. It's not a very good import. I've heard that there are maybe does it have permanent subtitles or something? I remember reading, I can't remember, but there was a lot of like logistics to this Blu-ray release that it did get that made it to where it wasn't necessarily the best kind of a release it could have gotten. Plus, again, it's only available if you have a region-free player. It's not a cheap Blu-ray either. That Blu-ray is also hard to find. So we really, really desperately need because I love Cemetery Man. I mean, it's not my favorite movie, but it's one of those that I would definitely, the moment it was announced, like the moment it gets announced, I will pick up. And we need a
Yeah,
better accessibility. It needs a better restoration too.
yeah, it's a strange movie. It has a weird atmosphere to it, and I think if it was to have a great Blu-ray release, it would look so good because it has that weird like dreamlike quality to it. So to put that in an HD format may even give the film a better atmosphere.
Oh yeah, it absolutely would. And I mean, it's one that would look beautiful on Blu-ray. It really is. I don't know what the hold up. I don't know why it's so hard to find them, but I mean, we really need it. We really do.
Yeah. Um, for me, I'm going to jump onto the bandwagon here with this movie actually has been released on the Blu-ray. It just needs a better Blu-ray release. And I actually think that it is coming. And I believe that it's being announced or has been announced sometime. Um, but Night of the Living Dead, the 1990 version, it was released on the Blu-ray. It was done by what was it, Twilight Films or
Yeah.
Twilight Releases or something. So it was a very limited, I mean,
Twilight Time.
very, very limited, and it was very expensive. So you had to have money to get it. And it hasn't had any other release besides that one time Twilight Times release. So that film, I think, would be, it's not only a great movie, but I feel like it would benefit from an HD master onto a Blu-ray format with, extra features and everything related to the film. It's something I'd really love to have. And I wasn't one of the lucky people to be able to get the Twilight release. So I'm still stuck with a DVD from, what was it, like early 2000s when that DVD came out.
Yeah, and honestly, those movies from a lot of those films from Twilight Time really does need a new Blu-ray. And I'm not saying Twilight Time doesn't do a great job with it. But there are, the way I understand it, there are two different ways you can acquire a film for restoration. You can either buy the HD masters or the film reels or whatever it is at one price to manufacture for as many as you want of those, but it's only for a certain amount of time until your rights expire. Or you could just buy the amount of units that you want to make. And Twilight Time has decided to, well, they did, they're not really around anymore, but they decided to do a 3,000 run. So not only was it Night of the Living Dead 1990 that has, criminal accessibility where you have to pay so much money for a Blu-ray, but if you remember back, not Fright Fight, it's Fright Night. Fright Night got a Twilight Time Blu-ray, and it's like, I think it was that Twilight Time Blu-ray at one point hit around $140. Like people were really wanting it. There were 3,000 copies. The 3,000 copies sold out in like 2 days, and people were really wanting it. That's why it had a high demand. They didn't print anymore, and it's impossible to find it. I think there's a better release now, but that was an issue. What else was The Blob? The Blob had a release from Twilight Time, 3,000. It was the 1980s version, and again, that one went out of print, $100, $120.
Yeah.
And now we have a Scream Factory version of that, thankfully, but there's those movies from Twilight Time that's just not accessible. And that leads me to another movie, and my third and final pick, and that is Necronomicon by Brian Usna. It is an anthology film. This, I do have the Blu-ray. It is a German Blu-ray. It's not necessarily inaccessible, but I think I wonder. I'm kind of curious to look up to see how much it is because I think it was also a limited run, and it's a very fun movie. It's definitely not a perfect movie, but it's one that we really need in the States, and that's kind of like what the problem is now. There's ask me and Chris this 10 years ago, and we would have told you a list of 500 movies that we wish it was on Blu-ray. We're finally getting a lot of these movies on Blu-ray after all these years, but now it's kind of coming.
I still have a list of 500 movies though.
Yeah, I mean there is a long list, but like all the ones that's like the most pivotal ones, like the ones that we really really wanted, they're starting to come out. But a lot of them, the problem is accessibility. Like how many of these are
Yeah.
they going to make? And of course, Vinegar Syndrome is doing a great job as well, and they are putting a lot of stuff out that we really do like. But Vinegar Syndrome's, they're selling out at times. They have partner labels, and sometimes they drop those films from partner labels, and 3 days later they're gone, and you're paying $150 for that film. So again, it's just coming down to the fact that collecting is a bitch, but it's fun. We love it. We wouldn't want to change it for the world. Let me look up before we end the podcast. Let me just look up Necronomicon. You've seen this, Chris?
Yeah, I only have the VHS of it, so it's one of those movies that was lost over time through digital formatting, and we're only lucky to have a VHS copy.
Yeah, it has Jeffrey Combs in it. It's really good film. It is German. That is a German Blu-ray. It's not an out of print Blu-ray, but it's about $30 overall.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, that reminds me, these releases that we're talking about is releases for the US because as we mentioned, there's probably going to be releases overseas in like German or, somewhere. But these are non-US titles. So anything that's been released in the US is off limits. So these are only movies that's never been released on Blu-ray in the United States.
Right. And a lot of things, of course, went out of print in the US. They may be in print other places as well. And me and Chris also have an entirely different list probably about films that used to be available that we may not own or may own that we now cannot get because they're $200, so they need to come back in print. But of course,
Yeah.
there are a lot of movies still to be seen. There's a lot of restoration work. Thank God we're getting Martin. We're finally getting Martin on Blu-ray, which is great. Eyes of Fire was one on my list for a very long time. Kathy's Curse, love that one. So some of these films that we really wanted, they are finally coming out, thankfully. So, anybody listening to this podcast that has any connections to these films that can get these released, please, 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 we will buy them, put them out.
Yep. So that is our edition of Why Aren't You on Blu-ray? This is volume one, I guess, or part one. And later on, we'll be doing another episode and giving you 3 to 6 more titles that we believe are deemed worthy enough to have a Blu-ray release.
Heck yeah. Thank you guys for listening.
Later, Tater.